Today, we look at the worst revenge deaths ever recorded, from a high-rise apartment in New Jersey where a dispute made a trip down the stairs fatal, to a quiet Valentine's night in Texas where a husband walked into his bathroom unaware of what awaited him. It was July 11th, 2016, in Melbourne, Australia. The morning was clear, with sunlight glinting off wet streets from an overnight drizzle. Traffic flowed steadily. Cyclists wove between commuters, and on the corner of a busy intersection, a simmering argument was about to erupt into a deadly confrontation. Elliot Granger, 29, worked as a software developer at a mid-sized tech firm. He spent weekdays immersed in coding and debugging, often solving complex problems under tight deadlines outside work. Elliot was an avid cyclist, using weekends to train and explore city streets for fitness and recreation. However, he had previously reported repeated confrontations with a neighbor over parking disputes, including threats and aggressive gestures. Elliot's cycling gear was standard for urban riders: high-visibility jersey, helmet, and reflective strips on his bike. He trusted these precautions and his knowledge of local traffic patterns to keep him safe. The neighborhood had moderate traffic, crosswalks, and signals, but intersections could be chaotic during morning hours. Surveillance footage later confirmed the neighbor's vehicle, a black SUV driven by Darius Kincaid, had been involved in multiple aggressive maneuvers near the apartment driveway and intersection in the weeks prior, signaling a potential threat. That morning, Elliot cycled to a local cafe, taking a familiar route past the disputed apartment complex. Darius was observed leaving the property in the black SUV, engine running aggressively, glancing toward the street where Elliot would cross. Despite prior warnings from police about escalating hostility, Elliot continued his route, assuming the conflict would not escalate to physical harm. Pedestrians and nearby cafe patrons noted tension in the street, but few anticipated violence. As Elliot approached the intersection, the SUV accelerated. Witnesses described the vehicle veering slightly to strike the cyclist directly at approximately 25 miles per hour. Elliot attempted to brake and swerve, but the impact threw him several meters across the asphalt. He was first struck by the front bumper, then secondary impact with the pavement and curb, his bike crumpling beneath him. He suffered direct trauma to the torso and abdomen. Bystanders called emergency services immediately, some trying to provide first aid. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes. Elliot was unconscious, pale, and bleeding internally, with labored, shallow breathing. Assessment indicated massive abdominal trauma, including lacerations to the liver and spleen, hypotension, and tachycardia, consistent with hemorrhagic shock. Despite rapid intervention and attempts at stabilization, vital signs deteriorated. Witness footage from nearby shops captured the SUV fleeing the scene moments after impact, tires squealing, leaving only shocked pedestrians behind. Forensic examination later confirmed that Elliot died from blunt force trauma to the torso, which caused lacerations to the liver and spleen, resulting in hemorrhagic shock. The manner of death was ruled a homicide. Investigators analyzed vehicle deformation, skid marks, paint transfer, and surveillance footage, along with witness statements, to conclusively link the SUV to Darius Kincaid. He was subsequently arrested and charged with manslaughter, pending further assessment of intent under Australian law. It was September 18th, 2018, in a rural township outside Yuba City, California. The evening air was still and warm as residents settled in after sunset, unaware that a calculated act of revenge was unfolding on a secluded property at the edge of farmland. Daniel Hargreave, 41, was known locally as a private contractor who handled renovation work for low-income housing. Multiple former clients later described disputes over incomplete work, withheld payments, and threats of legal action that never materialized. One of those clients was Miguel Alvarez, a 36-year-old farmhand who had hired Hargreave months earlier to repair a rental unit he shared with his family. Records showed Miguel paid in installments, but the work stalled. When Miguel pressed for refunds, Hargreave responded by filing a civil complaint accusing him of property damage, a claim later dismissed. Phone records showed escalating contact between the two men in the weeks before September 18th. That night, Hargreave agreed to meet Miguel at a rural property owned by a relative, after Miguel claimed he had cash to settle the dispute. What happened next was reconstructed through forensic evidence and surveillance footage recovered from nearby farm equipment cameras. Investigators determined that an altercation occurred near a storage shed shortly after Hargreave arrived. Blood evidence showed Hargreave sustained multiple stab wounds to the abdomen and upper thigh. The injuries caused significant blood loss, but did not damage major organs or arteries. A forensic pathologist later concluded the wounds were survivable with prompt medical care. Hargreave did not receive care. Instead, evidence showed he was moved while still alive. Tire impressions matched Miguel's vehicle, and drag marks led toward a capped septic system servicing an unused farmhouse on the property. The concrete access lid had been removed earlier that day. Investigators determined Hargreave was positioned face down at the open septic access, with his airway directly exposed to the confined gases. The lid was then replaced, and there were no signs of restraint or defensive movement consistent with rapid incapacitation. The autopsy revealed that Hargreave died from acute hydrogen sulfide exposure and oxygen deprivation. Toxicology results showed he was alive when exposed to the gas. The concentration levels within the tank would have caused rapid respiratory paralysis and loss of consciousness within seconds. Death followed shortly after. The stab wounds contributed to incapacitation, but were not the cause of death. Hargreave's body was discovered 3 days later when a maintenance worker arrived to service the septic system after pressure alarms were triggered. Emergency responders pronounced him dead at the scene. Miguel Alvarez was arrested after investigators reviewed phone records, vehicle data, and blood evidence linking him to the site. During questioning, he admitted to the confrontation and stabbing, but claimed he believed Hargreave would survive. Prosecutors argued the disposal was deliberate and retaliatory. They cited Miguel's knowledge of the septic system, the timing of the meeting, and the decision to leave without seeking help. He was charged with second-degree murder. At trial, the jury found that while the stabbing showed intent to harm, the act of placing Hargreave into the septic system demonstrated conscious disregard for life. Miguel was convicted and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Investigators concluded the case was a revenge killing, carried out not with a final blow, but by abandoning a living victim in an environment known to be lethal. It was August 14, 2018, off the coast of Santa Barbara, California, aboard a small contractor-run dive vessel supporting inspection work. The sea was calm, visibility was good, and multiple boats were anchored along the reef. Divers moved methodically across the deck, checking gear, logging depths, and setting cameras before entering the water. From above, everything looked controlled. Among the divers on board that morning was Andrew Collins, 34, a marine survey technician who spent most of his working life underwater. He inspected docks, pilings, and submerged cables, often logging hundreds of dives a year. He was experienced and methodical, favoring surface-supplied air for longer jobs that required staying in one position rather than descending deep. The assignment that day was routine, a shallow inspection for a private contractor, the kind of work he had done many times before. Ryan Mercer, 36, was also assigned to the boat. He and Andrew had worked together for years, but their relationship had soured after a dispute over inspection records that cost Ryan future work. Colleagues later described months of unresolved tension and deliberate avoidance. Despite that history, scheduling placed them on the same charter that morning. Andrew entered the water first, wearing a helmet-mounted camera connected to a surface-supplied air hose from the deck compressor. Crew members later confirmed the line was checked and secured before descent. Deck cameras showed Ryan remaining near the compressor after Andrew submerged. As a separate diver surfaced unexpectedly and required assistance at the rail, a concurrent safety issue briefly drew crew attention away from the compressor area, allowing Ryan to move behind stacked tanks and handle Andrew's air hose for several seconds. Underwater footage shows Andrew working steadily along the reef wall, His breathing is calm as he adjusts his position and continues the inspection. About 9 minutes in, the audio shifts. Breathing becomes uneven. Air bubbles drop sharply. Andrew pauses, looks toward the hose, and tugs it once. He signals upward and begins to swim, but the line slackens. His movements grow frantic as the air supply stops, his hands grasping behind him as he kicks upward without oxygen. Deck footage captures a crew member noticing the hose tension change. Someone shouts that Andrew is moving fast. The line is pulled in, but it goes slack. Divers rush to the rail. Underwater, Andrew drops his tools. His camera shakes violently. He releases the hose and kicks upward, but his ascent slows. The footage captures uncontrolled movement, then a sudden stillness as the camera tilts toward open water. A safety diver enters the water within moments. Andrew is reached near the bottom and brought to the surface. CPR begins immediately on deck. Emergency services were contacted at 11:26 a.m., according to dispatch logs. Despite resuscitation attempts, Andrew is pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as hypoxic asphyxia from a sudden loss of air supply. The helmet and regulator showed no internal failure. Investigators determined Andrew did not activate the bailout valve before losing consciousness. They noted that sudden air deprivation can rapidly cause confusion, air hunger, and loss of coordination, which may explain why he failed to use the emergency air supply despite his training. Inspection of the air hose revealed a deliberate partial cut that failed under pressure once underwater movement increased load on the damaged section. Investigators reviewed deck footage, compressor logs, and dive video, placing Ryan at the hose shortly before the air loss. Messages recovered from his phone showed explicit resentment toward Andrew over lost work. Mercer was arrested and later convicted of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 15 years to life in California State Prison. The dive operator updated safety rules, requiring constant airline monitoring and restricted access to compressor systems. It was January 8, 2018, inside a mid-rise apartment building in New Jersey. A fourth-floor concrete hallway sat under harsh fluorescent lights, winter air seeping through poorly sealed windows as a ceiling-mounted security camera recorded the space. Natalie Pierce, a 39-year-old office administrator, lived in apartment 4B and had been engaged in an ongoing dispute with her neighbor over noise complaints. Known for her meticulous nature and tendency to document grievances, Natalie had filed multiple complaints with building management about loud music and late-night disturbances. Mara Stone, her neighbor in 4C, had grown increasingly frustrated with the constant complaints and decided to retaliate. The apartment doors featured hydraulic self-closing mechanisms designed to ensure proper closure while preventing slamming, with adjustable tension settings controlled by a small valve. Earlier that day, while Natalie was at work, Mara Stone had accessed the hallway and tampered with the door closer mechanism on apartment 4B. Security footage later showed her adjusting the hydraulic valve to maximum tension, significantly increasing the force with which the door would close. The modification was intended as harassment, designed to create an annoyingly loud slam whenever Natalie entered or exited her apartment. That evening, Natalie returned home from work carrying groceries and wearing a heavy winter coat. She unlocked her apartment door and stepped inside to set down her bags, before immediately exiting again to check her mailbox. As she stepped into the hallway, the modified door mechanism engaged with excessive force, slamming shut much faster and harder than normal. The door slammed shut with abnormal speed and force as Natalie stepped into the hallway. The unexpected acceleration caused her to misstep and twist off balance, leaving her unable to brace as she fell backward. Encumbered by her winter coat and grocery bags, she was unable to brace as her head struck the unforgiving surface with a sharp impact that echoed through the hallway. The security camera captured the entire sequence, showing the door's abnormally aggressive closure and Natalie's subsequent fall. A neighbor discovered Natalie unconscious in the hallway approximately 20 minutes later and immediately called emergency services. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes but found no pulse. She was pronounced dead at the scene from severe blunt force head trauma. The medical examiner determined that the impact had caused fatal brain injury. Security footage provided investigators with clear evidence of both the door tampering and the fatal incident. Police arrested Mara Stone on charges of involuntary manslaughter after building maintenance confirmed the hydraulic mechanism had been deliberately altered beyond manufacturer safety specifications. Mara Stone later pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 8 years in state prison, followed by supervised release. Natalie's death became a case study cited in building safety advisories, highlighting how deliberate tampering driven by personal retaliation can turn ordinary residential spaces deadly. It was July 14th, 2016. The evening heat in Phoenix, Arizona lingered well after sunset, the kind that pressed down on the city and made breathing feel heavier than normal. In a modest apartment complex on the city's west side, Carmen Torres, a 45-year-old administrative assistant, returned home after a double shift at a medical billing office. Carmen lived alone. Her days were structured and predictable: work, errands, paperwork, sleep. She was known among coworkers for being methodical and uncomplaining, someone who followed procedures because she believed systems only worked if people used them correctly. That mindset had recently pulled her into a conflict she hadn't anticipated. 3 weeks earlier, Carmen had filed a formal complaint with the city after repeated issues with emergency response times in her neighborhood. On 2 separate occasions, she had called 911 for unrelated incidents and waited more than 40 minutes for help. After the second delay, she requested a case review, submitting call timestamps and recordings obtained through a public records request. The complaint referenced operator 412, the dispatcher assigned to both calls, identified only by an operator ID number listed in the records. Monica Reynolds, 42, worked the overnight shift at the Regional Emergency Communications Center. She had been a dispatcher for nearly 9 years and was known internally for her rigid control of calls and tendency to dismiss what she considered non-critical reports. Supervisors had previously counseled her for tone and judgment issues, but staffing shortages kept her on active duty. When Monica learned of the complaint, she took it personally. According to later testimony, she viewed Carmen as a civilian, attempting to interfere with a job she didn't understand. The review threatened disciplinary action and possible reassignment. Consequences Monica blamed entirely on Carmen. On the night of July 14th, Carmen began experiencing sudden chest tightness and difficulty breathing while preparing dinner. She attempted to sit down, but dizziness forced her to the floor. At 9:18 p.m., she called 911. The call connected to Monica's console. Audio recordings later confirmed Carmen's voice was strained but coherent. She reported shortness of breath, radiating chest pain, and numbness in her left arm, symptoms that normally trigger an automatic Priority 1 medical response in the computer-aided dispatch system. Investigators later determined that operator 412 manually entered the call as nervous caller or anxiety-related, bypassing automatic ambulance dispatch and preventing units from being assigned. She asked prolonged follow-up questions unrelated to immediate dispatch, including whether Carmen had a prior anxiety diagnosis or had taken medication, then placed the call on hold for more than 2 minutes as Carmen struggled to respond. Dispatch logs showed no ambulance was assigned during that window. At 9:27 p.m., Carmen's breathing became erratic. Her responses slowed. The call recording captured a faint thud, followed by silence. Despite mandatory protocol requiring an immediate welfare check when a caller becomes unresponsive, operator 412 marked the call as caller disconnected and closed it without dispatching police or medical units. No units were sent. At 10:04 p.m., a neighbor heard a smoke alarm sounding continuously and called emergency services. A different dispatcher sent fire and medical units immediately. Responders forced entry into Carmen's apartment and found her unresponsive on the kitchen floor. Paramedics attempted resuscitation for 21 minutes. Carmen was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner later determined the cause of death was an acute myocardial infarction. Investigators noted that timely intervention would have significantly increased her chances of survival. The death initially appeared natural, until Carmen's family requested her 911 call records. An internal review traced Operator 412's console activity and CAD entries to Monica Reynolds, confirming she handled the call, falsified its priority classification, delayed dispatch, and closed it in violation of mandatory protocol. Investigators also uncovered the unresolved complaint Carmen had filed weeks earlier. Prosecutors argued the actions were retaliatory, not negligent. Monica Reynolds was arrested and charged with second-degree murder and abuse of public trust, citing deliberate record falsification and failure to initiate a welfare check following internal review and grand jury consideration. She was convicted and sentenced to a lengthy prison term. It was February 5, 2016, and a brutal winter had gripped suburban Ohio. Temperatures hovered near 15 degrees Fahrenheit as snow accumulated around a modest duplex on the outskirts of town. The two-story building housed separate tenants, with 41-year-old Xander Holtz occupying the lower unit. A methodical part-time maintenance worker, Xander had spent years fixing problems others ignored. The building's heating system had been malfunctioning for weeks. The furnace exhaust vent, positioned just 3 feet above ground level, installed before newer building codes, released irregular vapor patterns that caught Xander's attention. He documented the issues and contacted the property supervisor repeatedly, believing the inconsistent exhaust flow posed a safety concern. The supervisor, 54-year-old Martin Keel, managed multiple rental properties and faced mounting pressure from building owners over maintenance costs. Xander's persistent complaints had triggered expensive inspections and repair orders that threatened Martin's contract renewals. Each report Xander filed resulted in formal citations that went directly to Martin's employers, jeopardizing his income. Martin had already lost 2 other property contracts due to tenant complaints. Written warnings appeared under Xander's door, accusing him of harassment. Text messages between the 2 men revealed escalating hostility, with Martin explicitly stating that Xander's complaints were costing him thousands in repair orders and threatening his livelihood. Xander, stubborn and safety-conscious, refused to drop the matter despite Martin's desperate pleas. On the night in question, Arctic air pushed temperatures down to 18 degrees. Xander remained inside his unit, running the furnace continuously to maintain warmth. The building's exterior security camera captured Martin's pickup truck arriving around 10 p.m., headlights cutting through the darkness. Footage showed Martin walking directly to the furnace vent, carrying a plastic bag filled with materials. Working quickly in the bitter cold, he began stuffing insulation and plastic sheeting deep into the exhaust opening. His movements were deliberate and thorough, severely restricting the exhaust flow. Within minutes, he returned to his vehicle and drove away. Inside the duplex, the furnace continued its programmed heating cycle. Investigators later noted that the unit was older and poorly maintained, and its pressure safety switch failed to shut the system down despite the obstruction. With exhaust gases unable to escape through the blocked vent, carbon monoxide began backing up into the heating unit. The deadly gas slowly seeped into the living space through ductwork and small gaps around the furnace housing. The colorless, odorless poison accumulated gradually over several hours while Xander slept. As morning approached, carbon monoxide concentrations had reached lethal levels throughout the lower unit. Xander likely woke feeling disoriented or nauseous, common symptoms of CO poisoning. Security footage showed no movement near windows or doors, suggesting he collapsed before realizing the danger. His body was discovered near the living room couch, where he had apparently fallen while attempting to investigate his worsening condition. Fire department personnel arrived and immediately detected dangerous carbon monoxide levels using specialized equipment. Investigators found synthetic fibers and plastic fragments lodged deep within the blocked exhaust vent. These materials matched the insulation and sheeting discovered in Martin's work truck during a subsequent search. Text message records revealed Martin's financial desperation and explicit threats about silencing Xander's complaints permanently. Martin Keel was arrested and later convicted of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to decades in state prison, bringing the case to a close. It was February 11th, 2018, and the winter snow in Denver had created treacherous driving conditions throughout the city, with black ice covering the roads, where 8-year-old Emma Williams had been struck and killed 6 months earlier. The intersection of Maple Street and 15th Avenue had become a shrine of flowers and teddy bears, a constant reminder to Robert Williams of the daughter he had lost and the justice he had been denied. Robert sat in his pickup truck outside Murphy's Tavern, watching through the frosted windshield as Jonathan Pierce celebrated his 34th birthday with friends inside the dimly lit bar. At 41, the grieving father had spent every day since his daughter's death planning this moment. Court testimony and psychological evaluations later described Robert as fixated on the perceived injustice of the lenient 18-month sentence that Jonathan had received for the hit-and-run accident that had destroyed Robert's world. Court records show the charges were reduced after defense attorneys argued that Pierce's alcoholism required treatment rather than incarceration. Police reports and witness statements later confirmed that Pierce's BMW struck Emma as she crossed Maple Street on a Tuesday morning as she walked to school along her usual route, a path she had taken safely hundreds of times before. Jonathan had been driving home from an all-night drinking session when his vehicle struck Emma at 45 miles per hour, throwing her small body 30 feet into a chain-link fence. Robert had been walking behind Emma, planning to surprise her with a lunch visit at school, and had watched helplessly as his daughter died in his arms while Jonathan fled the scene. The investigation had quickly identified Jonathan through witness descriptions and damage to his vehicle, but his family's wealth and connections had influenced every aspect of his prosecution. Jonathan served only 14 months in a minimum security facility that resembled a country club more than a prison. Robert had attended every court hearing, watching in disbelief as the justice system failed his daughter. Robert's marriage had collapsed under the weight of grief and anger, with his wife Sarah unable to cope with his obsession with revenge and his descent into alcoholism. She had moved to California with their surviving son, leaving Robert alone in the house where Emma's bedroom remained exactly as she had left it. Robert had lost his job as a construction foreman due to his drinking and erratic behavior, spending his days researching Jonathan's activities and planning his revenge. Investigators later found surveillance notes and phone records confirming he had tracked Pierce's movements for weeks before the killing, learning his routines and waiting for the perfect opportunity to confront him. Jonathan had returned to his previous lifestyle of heavy drinking and partying after his release from prison, showing no apparent remorse for Emma's death. That evening, Robert waited in the tavern's parking lot until Jonathan emerged alone, stumbling slightly from the alcohol he had consumed during his birthday celebration. Robert approached him with a tire iron concealed behind his back, his heart pounding as he prepared to avenge his daughter's death. When Jonathan saw Robert approaching, he showed no recognition or concern, treating the encounter as a minor inconvenience. Robert confronted Jonathan about Emma's death, showing him photos of his daughter's funeral and describing the impact of her loss on his family. According to Robert's later confession, Pierce dismissed his accusations and told him to move on, triggering the assault. Witnesses in nearby vehicles reported hearing shouting moments before the assault began. Robert began beating Jonathan with the tire iron while screaming his daughter's name. Robert continued the assault long after Jonathan had stopped moving, his grief and anger pouring out in a frenzy of violence that left Jonathan's body barely recognizable. When his rage was finally spent, Robert sat down next to the body and called 911. Confessing to the murder while waiting for police to arrive. Robert was sentenced to 15 years in prison, with the judge acknowledging the emotional circumstances that had led to the crime while condemning the vigilante justice. The case divided public opinion, with many sympathizing with Robert's grief, while others condemned his decision to take the law into his own hands. Emma's story became a rallying point for stricter drunk driving laws and victims' rights advocacy, ensuring that her death would not be forgotten. It was May 22, 2017, in Leipzig, Germany. A dormant threat born of malice. Staff moving between stations were unaware that the hydraulic press, one of the largest on the line, had been compromised. Klaus Brenner, 45, had worked as a press operator for over 2 decades, respected for his precision and reliability. He managed heavy machinery with years of accumulated skill, understanding the timing, pressures, and load tolerances of each hydraulic system. Klaus was known among colleagues for his methodical nature and quiet professionalism. Outside of work, he volunteered with a local technical school, mentoring apprentices in industrial safety and metalworking techniques. Despite his caution, Klaus often relied on routine and habit, assuming that standard safety interlocks and emergency stops were fully functional. Klaus's responsibilities included feeding large metal sheets into presses capable of exerting hundreds of tons of force, operating controls from a short distance while monitoring alignment, and coordinating with line assistants to maintain workflow. The machinery required precise calibration and awareness of potential hazards like misfeeds, hydraulic leaks, and unexpected system cycles. He wore all standard protective gear, steel-toed boots, gloves, and a reinforced apron, but his confidence in the equipment's safety systems created a blind spot, particularly toward human interference. CCTV footage showed that in the morning of May 22, 2017, a former supervisor, recently terminated in January, had returned with clear intent to sabotage, slipping through the busy factory floor wearing his work uniform. The safety interlock on the primary hydraulic press had been deliberately bypassed by tampering with the control circuitry, leaving the machine capable of cycling even when guards were open. Co-workers noticed a faint difference in the press's operational hum, but dismissed it as routine maintenance noise. Klaus began his shift, lining up a stack of metal sheets, unaware of the tampering. The factory floor was busier than usual due to a large order, adding mild distraction and pressure to maintain efficiency. As Klaus lifted the first sheet into position, he followed his standard procedure, checking alignment and applying gradual pressure through the controls. A sudden mechanical jolt occurred as the press cycled unexpectedly due to the sabotaged interlock. Colleagues on either side froze as the machine descended. Witnesses described a sharp impact noise audible across the immediate section of the factory, startling nearby workers. Klaus was unable to withdraw. The emergency stop and manual override had been disabled by the sabotage, preventing any intervention. The press's ram struck Klaus's torso, compressing his chest and abdomen in an instant. The floor became chaotic, with alarms blaring and workers shouting for emergency assistance. Factory cameras captured the motionless form beneath the ram, and the frantic attempts of co-workers, providing a clear record of the rapid, fatal sequence. Emergency medical services were contacted, arriving within 10 minutes. Autopsy later confirmed multiple crush injuries to thorax and abdomen, with cause of death listed as blunt force trauma due to industrial press. The manner of death was determined to be homicide. Investigators reviewed footage, maintenance logs, and fingerprints, ultimately tracing the tampering to the former supervisor. The individual's actions constituted serious criminal offenses under German law. Following the incident, authorities issued a national wanted notice and coordinated with Interpol. As evidence suggested, the suspect had left Germany within days. Factory management immediately replaced safety interlocks on all presses and retrained operators on emergency procedures. The press line resumed work only after structural and procedural inspections ensured full compliance with safety protocols. Despite the identification of the suspect, authorities have not located him. It was August 7, 2015, and the heat in downtown Detroit had climbed to 94 degrees Fahrenheit as crews rushed to finish a new office tower, rising over the city's revitalizing core. The project was behind schedule, and pressure from management filtered down through the site under the supervision of Vincent Russo. Vincent Russo, 45, had spent more than 2 decades in construction, earning a reputation for keeping projects moving regardless of strain on his crews. Workers described him as strict and dismissive, often assigning the heaviest tasks to newer hires and those who struggled with English. Complaints were rarely documented, and deadlines always came first. Carlos Mendez, 22, had worked on the site for 8 months. An immigrant from El Salvador, he sent most of his pay home to support his wife and children. He avoided conflict, took extra shifts when asked, and rarely spoke up. Co-workers later told investigators that Carlos was frequently assigned undesirable work and left without assistance. In the weeks leading up to the incident, Carlos reported missing tools and unexplained write-ups. Nothing changed. On the morning of August 7th, site security reported finding stolen copper wire inside Carlos's locker during a routine inspection, and he was fired immediately. At the time, no evidence supported his claim that the wire had been planted. Security footage reviewed later showed Vincent entering the locker area alone shortly before the inspection, carrying wire consistent with what was found. That footage was not reviewed until after the fatal incident. That evening, Carlos returned to the construction site. Investigators later determined he returned to the site intending to confront Vincent and hold him personally responsible for the framing and his termination. Several workers remained on overtime shifts as Carlos took an elevator to the 15th floor, where Vincent was reviewing plans near an unfinished perimeter edge. Witnesses reported a heated confrontation that escalated into a physical struggle. The floor's perimeter lacked permanent guardrails, with only temporary markings in place as crews rushed to meet deadlines. OSHA inspectors would later cite the site for missing required fall protection on multiple levels. During the struggle, Carlos forcefully shoved Vincent toward the open edge. Vincent lost balance and fell approximately 190 feet to the concrete below. Emergency responders pronounced him dead at the scene due to catastrophic blunt force trauma. Carlos immediately called 911 and remained on site until police arrived. He admitted to pushing Vincent, but stated the act was fueled by rage over the framing and loss of his job. Multiple witnesses corroborated the confrontation and confirmed the absence of safety railings. The investigation revealed a pattern of workplace harassment and safety violations. OSHA cited the construction company for multiple infractions related to fall protection. Security footage confirmed Vincent's role in planting the wire, substantiating Carlos's claim of retaliation and wrongful termination. Prosecutors argued that while Carlos had been provoked, the shove was a deliberate act of revenge rather than self-defense. He was charged with voluntary manslaughter. After considering mitigating factors, including lack of prior criminal history and documented workplace misconduct, the court sentenced Carlos to 4 years in prison. It was December 3, 2023, in Wichita, Kansas, late on a quiet Sunday night. The apartment complex was mostly dark, with only a few windows still lit. Heat hummed through the vents. Inside one unit, a desk lamp glowed, a computer screen stayed on, and a live stream continued uninterrupted. Aaron Cole was 26 years old and worked weekdays at an IT help desk for a regional insurance company in Wichita, Kansas. His job involved routine technical support, but in the evenings, he streamed video games from his apartment to a small, steady audience. He wasn't a professional player, yet he held moderator status in several online groups, giving him control over who could join matches. One regular player was a gamer known as Rook, who had played alongside Aaron for more than a year. Chat logs later reviewed by investigators showed Aaron repeatedly criticizing Rook's performance during matches. The comments were public and personal. Missed shots were mocked, losses blamed on him, and mistakes highlighted during live streams. Weeks before the incident, the harassment escalated. During a ranked match, Aaron used his moderator privileges to remove Rook mid-game after a mistake. The ban was immediate and public. Messages afterward showed Aaron telling Rook he didn't belong in higher-level matches. Rook stopped playing but continued watching Aaron's streams. On December 3rd, Aaron entered a small online tournament streamed publicly. Rook was not playing but followed the match in chat as Aaron made repeated remarks about dead-weight teammates. After a narrow win, Aaron laughed and moved on. Minutes later, Rook sent private messages seeking to talk. Aaron did not respond. Rook went silent. Aaron continued streaming, briefly stepping away to get a drink. At 11:02 p.m., a 911 call was placed reporting an active hostage situation at Aaron's apartment. The caller claimed someone inside was armed and threatening violence. Dispatch classified it as a high-risk emergency. Officers were sent immediately. Police body cameras activated as officers arrived at the complex. They stacked outside Aaron's door and knocked loudly. Inside the apartment, the live stream audio captured Aaron's confusion. He stepped back into frame, holding his phone, asking what was happening. The knocking escalated quickly. Officers forced entry with weapons raised, as shown on body camera footage. Aaron backed into the living room, raising his hands with his phone still visible. The live stream archive captured the same moment from inside the apartment, showing him retreating with open palms as commands came from different directions. As he stepped backward toward the hallway, one of his arms moved briefly out of view near the doorway. Officers later stated they interpreted the movement as a possible reach toward a weapon. Given the high-risk dispatch classification, an officer fired a single shot. The live stream camera fell to the floor as Aaron collapsed. Video cut out, but audio continued briefly. Shouting, radio traffic, then silence. Emergency responders arrived within minutes, but Aaron was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as a single gunshot wound to the chest, with the round passing through the lung and heart and causing rapid, unsurvivable internal bleeding. Investigators traced the false emergency call to address spoofing software and online accounts belonging to Daniel Mendez, the individual known in gaming circles as Rook. They determined Mendez obtained Aaron's address through publicly shared details from past live streams and linked social media accounts, allowing him to place a convincing emergency call. Platform records, network activity, and preserved chat logs confirmed his identity and linked him to the call. Mendez was arrested and later convicted of making a false emergency report that resulted in death, a felony offense. He was sentenced to 7 years in state prison, with the court citing the foreseeable risk of lethal police response inherent in swatting cases. Authorities classified the incident as a fatal swatting attack. The live stream footage and police body camera recordings were preserved as evidence, and the case was later referenced by law enforcement in renewed warnings about swatting and online revenge. It was June 29, 2015, when a private backyard pool in Central Florida became the scene of a fatal incident rooted in deliberate retaliation. The home belonged to Grant Shelby, a 34-year-old construction foreman hosting a weekend gathering with friends and co-workers. Grant was known for his competitive nature and his tendency to settle conflicts publicly. Days earlier, during a crowded restaurant outing, he had confronted longtime friend Cade Miller over unpaid money, accusing him loudly and refusing to lower his voice. Several people witnessed the exchange. Cade left humiliated and angry. Grant's backyard featured an older residential in-ground pool installed before modern safety retrofits were common. While the pool had been updated cosmetically, its circulation system still relied on a single main drain connected to a high-powered pump. The drain was fitted with an anti-entrapment cover, but the system lacked a secondary drain or automatic vacuum release. Grant had delayed replacing the equipment due to cost. Cade arrived early to the gathering while Grant was inside preparing food. Security cameras mounted near the rear patio later showed Cade walking directly to the pool equipment area. He shut off the breaker briefly, removed the anti-entrapment drain cover using a handheld tool, then restored power to the pump before leaving the area. Investigators later determined this was done deliberately, disabling the pool's primary safety safeguard. When Grant emerged minutes later, he entered the pool without hesitation. He swam toward the deep end, diving beneath the surface. As he passed over the exposed main drain, the pump's suction pulled his upper thigh and hip firmly against the opening. Without a cover to distribute pressure, the vacuum sealed his body in place. Grant struggled immediately. Water churned violently around the drain as he attempted to push away, but the suction force, measured later during testing, was strong enough to pin an adult body underwater. His movements were visible from the surface, but several guests initially assumed he was holding his breath or playing. Within seconds, Grant's movements weakened. The suction prevented him from surfacing or repositioning. By the time guests recognized the distress and rushed to the pool's edge, nearly a minute had passed. One person attempted to pull him free but was unable to overcome the force. Another ran to the equipment panel and shut off the pump. Once suction released, Grant was lifted from the water and laid on the pool deck. CPR was initiated while emergency services were called. Paramedics arrived within 12 minutes, but Grant could not be revived. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as drowning due to mechanical body entrapment. Investigators recovered footage showing Cade removing the drain cover and restoring power to the system. Interviews confirmed Cade's motive stemmed from the public humiliation days earlier. There was no evidence the act was accidental or intended as a joke. Cade Miller was arrested and later convicted on charges including reckless homicide. He was sentenced to 25 years in state prison. Authorities noted that while death may not have been his stated goal, the act was deliberate, targeted, and carried out with clear disregard for human life. Grant Shelby's death prompted renewed scrutiny of older residential pool systems across the county. Officials emphasized that deliberate tampering with safety equipment, especially for revenge, can turn ordinary environments into fatal traps within seconds. It was September 5th, 2018, on a busy beach in Mumbai, India. As the afternoon heat lingered, responders later warned that shallow holes where vendors had dumped hot coals still concealed buried embers beneath the sand. Families passed food stalls and grills, with nothing to suggest what would unfold minutes later. Ananya Rao was 19, a first-year education student commuting from Andheri. She tutored children and helped at her mother's tailoring shop. Quiet and conflict-averse, she came to the beach between classes and work, leaving her phone face down on her towel to rest. Her circle was small. That afternoon, a friend brought Rohit Malakar, 25, who had been messaging her for weeks. 2 days earlier, Ananya had blocked him after filing a brief harassment complaint with her college, which led to him being barred from a campus tutoring program. Near a snack cart, he approached her again and asked her out. She declined in front of others. Several people nearby recognized him from the earlier dispute. He walked away without responding. As evening approached, most of the group left to find food. Ananya stayed behind, lying face down to block the glare. A short distance away, shallow holes where vendors had dumped hot coals dotted the beach, left behind after portable braziers were moved earlier in the afternoon. Beneath the sand, charcoal embers remained active, insulated by packed grains. Beach maintenance had not yet cleared the area, a common problem in sections without constant supervision, where unauthorized cooking was rarely enforced. Footage from a nearby beachfront cafe later showed Rohit returning alone to one of the shallow holes. He avoided direct contact with the sand. Instead, he used a flat metal food tray discarded near the grills to scrape and lift sand directly from above the embers. A faint shimmer of heat was visible in the footage above the hole. He tipped the tray twice, testing distance rather than touch, then carried it away, holding it extended from his body. The same camera showed him walking back toward Ananya, who remained motionless on her towel. He dropped the heated sand directly onto her head and shoved her face down with both hands before recoiling almost immediately from the heat. Ananya convulsed, arms scraping the ground as sand flooded her mouth and nose. Her cries were muffled, choked by grit. The sand caused immediate blistering to exposed skin, and inhalation drew superheated particles into her airway. Later medical findings showed that inhaled superheated sand had burned and obstructed her airway within seconds, causing rapid respiratory failure. Rohit was seen leaving several seconds later without the tray. When Ananya was later found, she was unresponsive. Her face was buried in sand that remained hot enough to burn rescuers when they tried to clear it from her mouth and nose. The skin around her mouth and cheeks was blistered and peeling. Sand was compacted into her nostrils and lips. There were no signs of a struggle beyond scrape marks in the sand beside her arms. A passerby noticed her lack of movement and ran for help. A vendor called the regional emergency number at approximately 5:02 p.m. Municipal lifeguards arrived within 3 minutes, followed by an ambulance from City Medical Services approximately 6 minutes later. Attempts to clear her airway and resuscitate her were unsuccessful. The autopsy confirmed death from mechanical suffocation and severe airway burns caused by inhaling superheated sand, which rapidly closed the throat and led to quick oxygen loss. Partial bystander videos and footage from the beachfront cafe captured the assault and the minutes-long delay before help arrived, later becoming central evidence in the investigation. Rohit was identified and detained that night. After a 4-year trial, he was convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. In the months that followed, local authorities ordered a ban on dumping hot coals on the beach and increased enforcement against unauthorized cooking. It was October 17th, 2015. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across a family-operated grain farm outside Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, Canada. Derek Lavoie, a 29-year-old farmhand, approached the 40-foot steel grain silo with a wrench and his work gloves. Derek had worked on his uncle's farm since graduating high school, choosing agricultural labor over college. He was reliable and known for staying late to handle equipment repairs that others avoided. Unmarried and living in a small rental house near the property, he spent most evenings maintaining machinery or helping his cousin Gareth with field work. His hands were calloused from years of manual labor, and his friends said he took pride in being the go-to person for difficult mechanical problems around the farm. Grain silos store thousands of bushels of wheat or barley, with augers moving grain from bottom to top. Clogs create voids and unstable bridges that can collapse suddenly, and moving grain can engulf a person in seconds. Most farms require lockouts and spotters, but smaller operations often skip these precautions during busy seasons. That afternoon, Derek needed to clear a jammed auger inside the main silo. The blockage had stopped operations for 2 days, delaying shipments to a regional grain distributor. Derek's uncle was traveling, leaving him and Gareth to handle the problem. What Derek didn't know was that Gareth, his 36-year-old cousin, had recently discovered Derek had been sleeping with his wife. The betrayal had been eating at Gareth for weeks, transforming years of camaraderie into bitter resentment. Derek climbed the external ladder and entered through the top hatch, without a safety harness or fall arrest, descending into the grain-filled chamber. Gareth remained outside, supposedly monitoring the auger controls. Standard procedure required the auger's power to be completely disconnected during internal work, with multiple safety locks engaged. Gareth had told Derek everything was secure, but he had deliberately bypassed the emergency disengage mechanism, leaving the system vulnerable to accidental or intentional activation. At approximately 3:15 in the afternoon, Derek reached the blockage point 15 feet below the grain surface. He radioed Gareth that he'd located the jam and was working to clear it. The radio's reply came through as static. Inside the steel shell, reception was poor. Moments later, without warning or explanation, the auger roared to life. The mechanical screw began churning violently, creating immediate and catastrophic grain movement. Derek shouted into his radio as thousands of pounds of wheat shifted around him, the grain flowing like liquid toward the auger's intake. The suction pulled him sideways into the steel wall with crushing force. His torso compressed against the silo's interior as grain continued flowing, pinning him completely. A farmhand working near the equipment shed heard Derek's muffled screams and ran to the silo base. He peered through the 6-inch inspection port and could see grain packed tightly against the silo wall, with no movement where Derek had been working moments earlier. The witness immediately shut down the main power and called emergency services, but the grain's pressure made extraction impossible without specialized equipment. Rescue teams spent 3 hours carefully removing grain to access Derek's body. He had suffocated within minutes of entrapment, unable to expand his chest against the compressed wheat. The autopsy revealed the official cause of death as compression asphyxia with associated crush injuries caused by grain entrapment. Provincial investigators sealed the silo and found the safety switches had been deliberately tampered that morning. Forensic testing confirmed the modifications were recent, and surveillance showed Gareth repeatedly near the control panel before the accident. He was arrested and charged with second-degree murder and criminal negligence causing death. He was later convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment under Canadian law, with parole eligibility set decades into the future. It was March 4th, 2018, and heavy spring rains had swollen rivers across rural Kentucky. The low-water crossing on County Road 47, normally passable in dry weather, was submerged under roughly 3 feet of fast-moving brown water after days of storms. 33-year-old Bria Stent had arrived at the crossing to set up safety equipment for a community fundraising event scheduled for the following weekend. A dedicated volunteer coordinator known for her meticulous planning, Bria worked part-time for a local non-profit organization. Her compassionate nature had earned her respect throughout the rural community, but those same qualities had recently created a powerful enemy. Several weeks earlier, Bria had been responsible for hiring seasonal workers for the organization's annual charity drive. When 39-year-old Caleb Noor approached her about employing his adult son for the project, Bria conducted a background check that revealed the young man's history of safety violations. Despite Caleb's persistent lobbying and veiled threats, Bria refused to compromise safety standards and declined to hire his son. Caleb, who worked as a heavy equipment operator for the county's water management department, took Bria's decision as a personal insult to his family's reputation. Text messages recovered later revealed his growing obsession with revenge against Bria, whom he blamed for damaging his son's employment prospects. Caleb had access to the manual controls for the upstream floodgate, which regulated water flow through the crossing. Bria was working alone near the water's edge, a violation of the nonprofit's safety protocols requiring two-person teams near flood conditions. Traffic cameras captured her positioning orange traffic cones and reflective barriers, showing her wading into knee-deep water to secure warning signs. Unknown to Bria, Caleb had driven to a small upstream control station approximately 1 mile above the crossing. Using his county access keys, he partially opened a main bypass control gate designed to rapidly release excess water during flood conditions, allowing a powerful surge to move downstream. Because the bypass gate discharged directly into a narrow limestone channel leading to the crossing, the increased water volume reached the area within 15 minutes. The narrow limestone channel, already saturated from weeks of rain, concentrated the surge into a powerful flow that raised the depth from 3 feet to nearly 5 feet. The stronger current began moving at approximately 8 miles per hour, creating dangerous hydraulic conditions. Bria, focused on securing the last warning sign, initially didn't notice the rising water level. As the current intensified, Bria attempted to wade back toward her vehicle parked on higher ground. However, the swift-moving water combined with slick limestone footing and uneven submerged concrete knocked her off balance, causing her to fall backward into the deeper channel. The current immediately swept her downstream toward a submerged concrete barrier that formed part of the crossing's foundation. The force of the water pinned Bria against an uneven, submerged concrete barrier, creating a hydraulic trap that prevented her from surfacing or escaping. Traffic camera footage showed her desperate struggle against the current before she disappeared beneath the surface. Emergency responders arrived within 20 minutes of a witness's call, but the dangerous water conditions prevented immediate rescue attempts. Bria's body was recovered 200 yards downstream approximately 2 hours later. The medical examiner determined that the cause of death was drowning complicated by blunt force trauma. Investigators discovered that the upstream sluice gate had been manually operated during the incident, despite no official authorization. Gate operation logs showed Caleb's access card had been used, and text message records revealed explicit threats of retaliation. Caleb Noor was later convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years in Kentucky State Prison. Thanks for watching. Want to see more? Click on your screen now. It was June 7, 2016, and the summer heat in Nashville reached 89 degrees as the city's music industry prepared for another busy evening. In the affluent Belle Meade neighborhood, sprawling homes sat quietly behind manicured lawns and wrought iron gates. Sarah Morrison stood in her granite kitchen, carefully preparing her husband's favorite meal, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to do. At 45, the former registered nurse had spent 15 years married to Bradley Morrison, a successful country music producer whose infidelities had finally pushed her beyond the breaking point. Her medical background had given her access to knowledge that most scorned wives could never obtain. Sarah's discovery of Bradley's affairs had begun 3 months earlier, when she found explicit messages on his phone. The evidence revealed a pattern of cheating involving multiple women from the music industry. Bradley had been using their joint accounts to fund expensive gifts and weekend getaways with his mistresses, spending money Sarah had helped earn through her nursing career. The betrayal had been devastating, but Sarah's response was methodical. She spent weeks documenting evidence while pretending to work on their marriage, secretly researching difficult-to-detect compounds during night shifts at a Nashville hospital. She obtained the compound through an anonymous online purchase, later traced to an account registered to the household. Her pharmaceutical knowledge provided the perfect weapon. According to her later confession, Sarah had chosen a slow-acting neurotoxin that would mimic heart attack symptoms, difficult to detect in standard autopsies. She practiced timing and dosage for weeks, calculating the exact amount needed to ensure Bradley's death while avoiding suspicion. That evening, she served Bradley his anniversary dinner with his favorite wine, into which she had mixed the compound. Phone logs and timestamps later confirmed the timing Sarah described. She sat with him for about 30 minutes as he began showing signs of distress. Bradley reportedly attributed his chest pains to stress from work and discussed his latest recording project, unaware his wife was orchestrating his death. Sarah expressed concern and suggested he rest, maintaining her composure as his condition deteriorated. Records show she waited 12 minutes before calling 911, ensuring paramedics would arrive too late. When first responders entered, she was performing CPR and providing medical details with professional precision. Bradley was pronounced dead 45 minutes later. Initial results listed cardiac arrest, but extended toxicology, ordered after examiners noted unusual organ markers, detected trace amounts of a rare cardiac-affecting compound. Sarah's medical background initially made her seem unlikely, but her documentation of Bradley's affairs provided clear motive when police searched their computer. Investigators matched an online purchase traced to the household with microscopic residue recovered from the decanter and confronted Sarah with the evidence. She confessed, explaining she wanted Bradley to experience the same betrayal she had felt. Sarah was sentenced to life without parole, showing no remorse and stating Bradley deserved his fate. It was November 18, 2016 in Manchester, England. A damp, cold night settled over the city, the streets slick with recent rain. Inside a quiet duplex complex, a personal betrayal was about to turn lethal, not through accident but through deliberate rage. Clara Winslow, 28, worked as a freelance graphic designer from her apartment, producing digital content for regional clients and occasional European brands. Just a week earlier, she had ended a 2-year relationship with Ronan Blackwood after he discovered she had been seeing someone else. Friends later described the breakup as volatile. They cited one confrontation outside her building that ended with police being called but no charges filed. Her apartment was modestly furnished, with equipment and electronics positioned around the living space, including a workstation in the corner and a mattress by the window for natural light. She often stayed up late completing design work, leaving windows slightly ajar for ventilation and to let in the city's ambient light. She had refused to install additional security measures beyond basic locks, believing situational awareness was sufficient. While technically mindful of risk, she underestimated human threats in her immediate environment. That night, Ronan returned to the complex. Neighbors had reported him loitering in previous evenings after arguments regarding shared property and personal items. Carrying a bottle of gasoline, he approached Clara's ground floor window, partially ajar for ventilation. A neighbor's private security camera captured a crouching figure at the window frame. The liquid container visible in hand, scene reconstruction reports detailed that Clara, unaware of the approaching danger, was likely completing work at her computer, headphones in, leaving her oblivious to external sounds. Ronan poured the gasoline across the mattress and nearby bedding, then ignited it with a lighter. Flames spread almost instantly across the synthetic fibers due to vapors in the confined space, rapidly climbing toward the window frame and nearby furniture. Smoke began filling the room almost immediately. Although some smoke escaped through the slightly open window, the ceiling height and clutter allowed dense smoke to accumulate near the floor, disorienting Clara. Evidence showed that Clara attempted to exit her bedroom, but shadows and smoke made doors and obstacles difficult to discern, complicating her escape. Neighbors heard persistent coughing and pounding on her bedroom door, but were unable to break it down before the fire's intensity caused localized ceiling plaster and timber above the mattress to collapse, further blocking potential egress. Firefighters arrived within 6 minutes of the alarm, but initial entry was slowed by heat and debris, forcing entry to find Clara unresponsive amid thick smoke and intense heat. She still had a faint pulse when pulled from the room, and was immediately transferred by ambulance to Manchester Royal Infirmary, where she was treated for severe smoke inhalation and burns. Despite resuscitation efforts, she was declared dead less than 2 hours later. Post-incident analysis confirmed the fire had originated on the mattress near the window, accelerated by liquid fuel, with rapid thermal propagation consistent with an accelerant. Evidence from neighbor cameras and fire debris corroborated the timeline and sequence of events, confirming no accidental cause. Coroner's report listed cause of death as mixed smoke inhalation and thermal burns, noting extensive soot in the airway and lungs and burns consistent with rapid room fire. Ronan Blackwood was arrested the following day, after footage and witness statements were cross-referenced. Manchester City Council fire inspectors required a formal assessment before repairs could proceed, and the complex implemented additional safety measures, including updated smoke alarms and door security. It was November 23, 2016, in Camden, New Jersey. Early winter temperatures had settled over the city as Elena Rodriguez finished cleaning offices in a downtown building late into the evening. Elena, 34, was a single mother working multiple jobs to support her daughter, Sophia. Financial records later showed her income was stretched thin by medical expenses after Sophia was diagnosed with leukemia the year before. When her insurance failed to cover treatment costs, Elena turned to Anthony Castellano, 45, a local lender operating outside state licensing requirements. Castellano's loans carried interest rates far above legal limits, with penalties that compounded weekly. Payment records showed that despite consistent deposits from Elena, the balance increased steadily. Police later documented multiple complaints against Castellano from borrowers who described intimidation tactics, including unannounced visits to homes and workplaces. In Elena's case, school administrators later confirmed Castellano appeared near Sophia's high school on more than one occasion. By the fall of 2016, Elena's debt exceeded $40,000. Phone records showed frequent contact initiated by Castellano, including late-night calls. Investigators later determined Elena began monitoring his movements after those encounters, learning that he regularly used an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the city to meet clients and store paperwork. On the evening of November 23rd, Elena contacted Castellano and told him she had cash to settle part of the debt. Cell tower data placed both individuals at the warehouse later that night. Surveillance footage from nearby buildings showed Elena entering alone, carrying a baseball bat, and leaving the area approximately 20 minutes later. Inside the warehouse, evidence indicated a violent confrontation occurred near the loading area. Blood spatter analysis showed multiple impacts to Castellano's head. The autopsy later identified extensive skull fractures, subdural hemorrhaging, and severe brain swelling consistent with repeated blunt force trauma. The medical examiner concluded Castellano lost consciousness quickly and died at the scene from catastrophic cranial injuries. Elena did not call for help. Investigators later recovered the baseball bat from a nearby dumpster, where it bore her fingerprints and Castellano's DNA. Castellano's body was discovered the following morning by a maintenance worker conducting a routine inspection. During the investigation, detectives uncovered Castellano's illegal lending operation and a documented pattern of harassment involving multiple victims. However, evidence also established that Elena had planned the encounter, brought a weapon, and lured Castellano to a private location under false pretenses. Elena was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. At trial, testimony from other borrowers provided context for Castellano's conduct, but prosecutors argued the killing was an act of deliberate retaliation rather than self-defense. The jury agreed, citing premeditation and the use of a weapon. Elena was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in state prison. Authorities later shut down Castellano's lending operation, and several civil cases followed. Sophia was placed with relatives. The warehouse was demolished 2 years later as part of a redevelopment project. Investigators concluded the case illustrated how prolonged exploitation and personal retaliation combined to produce a fatal outcome that neither side survived. It was June 18, 2016 in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, at a mountain zipline park during peak summer hours. The air was warm, Lines extended beyond the shaded platforms. Guides called out group numbers. Harnesses clinked against metal rails, and phones were raised as visitors waited, filmed, and talked over the constant hum of activity. Lena Whitaker was 22 years old, a college student from Kentucky visiting Pigeon Forge with 3 friends after finishing summer classes. She worked part-time at a campus bookstore and paid for short trips by taking extra weekend shifts. She had no background in extreme sports and wasn't filming for social media. The group chose the zipline park because it was nearby, affordable, and advertised as beginner-friendly. What most visitors didn't know was that Lena had a prior connection to one of the park's seasonal employees. Derek Hall, 29, worked on the zipline crew that summer, handling gear staging and harness rotation between groups. Years earlier, Derek and Lena attended the same high school. Multiple witnesses later confirmed that Lena had been part of a group that repeatedly mocked and humiliated him during that time. The encounters were not physical, but persistent. Former classmates described Derek as withdrawn afterward, while Lena moved on without consequences. The park operated multiple zipline runs across a wooded slope above a rocky ravine. Riders wore full-body harnesses clipped to a cable trolley, and guides followed a fixed routine, selecting a harness, tightening straps, performing a brief visual and tug check, then signaling the launch. During peak hours, equipment was cycled rapidly with little idle time. That afternoon, staff logs and security footage showed Derek Hall lingering near the equipment rack, despite not being assigned to that station. Cameras recorded him removing a spare harness, turning it inward, and handling the waist assembly out of view before returning it to the rack. About 10 minutes later, Lena's group reached the front. A guide selected the compromised harness, placed it on Lena, tightened the straps, and clipped her into the line. From bystander phone footage, the checks appear routine. Hands-on webbing, quick tug, then clearance to launch. No visible issue was apparent. Lena stepped off the platform and rolled smoothly onto the cable. Security footage showed her traveling normally across the first span, legs bent, posture stable. She crossed above the open air toward the center of the ravine. Mid-line, as Lena reached the lowest point of the cable span, the trolley jolted slightly, causing a sudden spike in force that tore the already compromised strap completely. Security footage shows her body drop abruptly. The bystander's phone captured cheering breaking into shouting as she fell from the line. She struck rock and compacted soil approximately 70 feet below. Operations halted immediately, as staff cleared the remaining riders from the platforms and contacted emergency services. The county medical examiner later ruled the cause of death as catastrophic blunt force trauma resulting from a fall from height. Inspection of the harness confirmed deliberate sabotage. Investigators determined that a primary load-bearing belay loop had been deliberately cut to the point of structural failure, consistent with the use of a blade rather than material fatigue or a manufacturing defect. Security footage from behind the staging platform showed Derek Hall handling the same spare harness minutes before it was issued, despite not being assigned to that station. Staff logs and supervisor statements confirmed he had unsupervised access to the equipment rack during that window. Hall was arrested later that evening and formally charged with first-degree murder and tampering with safety equipment. During a recorded interview, he admitted to sabotaging the harness and told investigators the act was motivated by long-standing resentment, tied to repeated humiliation he experienced during high school. He was later convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Authorities classified the death as a targeted homicide carried out using his workplace access. The park permanently closed the affected zip line, removed spare harnesses from public access, and revised equipment handling protocols. Investigators described the incident as rare and isolated. It was March 11, 2017, when a stretch of rural Texas highway became the scene of a fatal collision that would expose the deadly consequences of road rage. The two-lane asphalt cut through open farmland under clear afternoon skies, with visibility extending for miles in both directions. Light traffic moved steadily at posted speeds, the kind of peaceful drive that should have been routine. Colin Webb, a 27-year-old warehouse supervisor, was behind the wheel of his sedan heading home from work. Known for his quick temper and stubborn streak, Colin had just finished a heated roadside confrontation with Victor Cross over aggressive tailgating and excessive horn use. The argument had ended with both drivers returning to their vehicles, but Colin's anger hadn't cooled. His car was equipped with a forward-facing dash camera that recorded the incident and was later recovered from the vehicle by investigators. Traffic behind Colin included a pickup truck towing a utility trailer, maintaining proper following distance at approximately 55 miles per hour. The trailer added significant weight and momentum to the combination, requiring extended braking distances on the flat highway. Other vehicles traveled in both directions, creating a typical afternoon traffic pattern for the rural route. Without warning, Colin suddenly slammed his brakes in an intentional brake check, a retaliatory act meant to punish Victor Cross after their roadside confrontation. His sedan decelerated rapidly from highway speed, forcing the trailing pickup driver to react instantly. The pickup entered hard ABS braking as the driver attempted an emergency stop, but the heavy trailer's momentum caused the entire combination to jackknife. The out-of-control pickup struck Colin's rear bumper with tremendous force, launching his sedan forward into the oncoming traffic lane. An approaching SUV traveling at full highway speed had no time to avoid the collision. The SUV struck Colin's car broadside on the driver's side, crushing the driver's side door inward by approximately a foot. The side impact drove the door frame and dashboard directly into Colin's chest and head, causing severe trauma. The force of the collision spun his vehicle across both lanes before it came to rest perpendicular to traffic flow. Emergency responders arrived within 20 minutes, but Colin was pronounced dead at the scene from his injuries. The dash camera footage provided investigators with a complete record of the incident, clearly showing Colin's sudden brake application and the resulting collision sequence. The Texas Department of Public Safety ruled the death resulted from reckless driving and road rage retaliation. The pickup driver survived with minor injuries, while the SUV occupants required hospitalization but recovered. The footage ended with Colin's sedan immobilized across both lanes, a stark reminder of how quickly aggressive driving can turn fatal. Skid marks stretched over 200 feet behind the pickup truck, while debris from both vehicles scattered across the roadway for nearly 100 yards. The highway remained closed for 4 hours as investigators documented the scene and cleared the wreckage. After investigators completed their review, Colin's family authorized the release of the dash camera footage as part of a campaign against aggressive driving behaviors. The coroner's report confirmed that Colin died instantly from blunt force trauma to the chest and head, with no evidence of alcohol or drugs in his system at the time of the crash. His death certificate listed the cause of death as blunt force trauma due to a motor vehicle collision, with the manner of death ruled accidental under traffic fatality classification, despite evidence of reckless retaliatory driving. Victor Cross was later questioned but not charged, as investigators determined Colin's retaliatory brake check was the initiating act that caused the fatal chain reaction. It was July 22, 2017, in a high-rise apartment in New Jersey. The night felt ordinary. Warm air, cracked windows, echoing hallways, elevators chimed, traffic hummed, and faint music leaked through walls. Nothing suggesting the building would hold 2 deaths before midnight that same night. Among the tenants were Eric and Dana Wilkes, both 35 years old. They lived on the 15th floor of a mid-rise apartment building. They were newly married and known in the building for loud weekends. Parties ran late, music carried through the stairwells, and noise complaints followed them from the first month. When a downstairs neighbor, Noor Al-Hassan, began filing formal reports, the couple mocked her openly, filming hallway arguments and sharing the clips privately. Management issued fines. The behavior didn't stop. Noor was 29 and worked overnight catering shifts at a major international airport, sleeping during the day on a strict schedule. The parties regularly disrupted her rest. When she complained, harassment escalated. Notes under her door, mocking in the elevator, and recorded confrontations. Management documented the incidents but delayed taking stronger action. By July, tensions were common knowledge. On Friday night, Eric and Dana hosted another gathering. Alcohol flowed, music echoed down the stairwell. Near midnight, guests left. Eric and Dana decided to take trash and recycling down together before bed, choosing the stairwell they regularly used instead of the elevator. CCTV covered the stairwell from the 15th floor to the ground. At 11:39 p.m., Noor entered alone carrying a small bottle, knelt between the second and third floors, and poured a clear liquid across several steps, spreading it evenly before wiping the bottle clean and leaving. Maintenance later identified the liquid as cooking oil from her apartment. At 11:46 p.m., Eric and Dana entered the stairwell from the 15th floor, laughing, each carrying trash bags. Eric descended first. As he stepped onto the oiled section, his foot slipped forward. His center of gravity shifted backward. CCTV captured his arms flailing before he fell hard, striking the back of his head against the concrete edge of a step. He went limp immediately. Dana screamed and rushed down toward him. As she reached the same steps, she lost traction as well. Her feet slid out, and she fell sideways, her upper body twisting awkwardly. She struck the stair rail and collapsed partially on top of Eric. The camera showed her trying to push herself up, slipping repeatedly, her movements slowing as she remained pressed against his body in the stair wall. Within seconds, both stopped moving. No one else entered the stairwell for several minutes. At 12:02 a.m., another tenant opened the stairwell door from the first floor, saw the bodies, and ran to call 911. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes. Eric was pronounced dead at the scene. Dana had no pulse and could not be revived. The medical examiner ruled that Eric died from a fractured skull and massive brain bleeding caused by the backward fall. Dana died from positional asphyxia, her chest and airway compressed against the stairs and Eric's body, with petechial hemorrhages confirming prolonged oxygen deprivation. Investigators reviewed the stairwell footage, documenting the deliberate oil spill and Noor's timing. During questioning, she admitted planning the act as revenge. Noor was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to 2 consecutive 30-year terms. The building later installed non-slip treads, expanded camera coverage, and tightened enforcement. Tenants avoided the stairwell for months. It was August 14th, 2017. The Shenzhen construction site stood 43 stories tall against the humid morning sky in China. Liang Wei, a 36-year-old senior foreman for a major Chinese construction firm, arrived at 6:30 in the morning to begin his daily inspection routine, unaware that a bundle of steel beams would end his life before lunch. Liang had spent 14 years working his way up from general laborer to senior foreman, earning respect for his meticulous attention to safety protocols. He carried a weathered inspection notebook everywhere, documenting rigging errors, load calculations, and equipment defects that others overlooked. His technical expertise in crane operations and load mechanics made him valuable, but also created friction with supervisors who prioritized speed over safety. Construction crane work involves coordinating massive suspended loads using steel cables and rigging systems, where a single failed connection point can send tons of material plummeting to the ground below, requiring constant vigilance and adherence to load capacity limits and mandatory rigging inspections that were often violated under deadline pressure. 3 weeks earlier, Liang had filed a formal complaint against Supervisor Chen Rong, 40, after discovering falsified rigging inspection reports on Chen's crew. The complaint triggered an internal investigation that threatened Chen's position. Co-workers later recalled increasing hostility between the two men, including a heated argument in the site office 2 days before the accident, where Chen accused Liang of sabotaging his career. That Monday morning, Chen authorized movement of a load, a 6-ton bundle of steel I-beams, along the North Corridor. Fully aware, Liang conducted his daily inspections along that exact path between 11 o'clock in the morning and noon, and deliberately scheduling the lift during that window. The rigging pins required regular visual inspections. Chen's crew had not performed the mandated checks in over a week, and a fatigue crack had developed inside one of the rigging pins, not visible during routine visual checks, and only exposed once the load was placed under full tension. Liang began his inspection route that morning, moving methodically through the construction zone with his notebook. Site rules forbade workers from passing beneath suspended lifts, but that corridor had been left open that morning to speed traffic. Multiple workers saw him walking the North Corridor, checking welding points and measuring clearances. Minutes later, Chen ordered his crane operator to reposition the steel bundle along the same corridor, creating a narrow window, where Liang would pass directly beneath the suspended load. The operator radioed for confirmation, specifically noting workers were still using the corridor, and was told to proceed by Chen. At 11:38 in the morning, the compromised rigging pin failed catastrophically. The 6-ton steel bundle detached from its mounting points, swinging violently off-center before dropping straight down. A fixed high-mast CCTV camera overlooking the north corridor recorded the load's swing and the moment of detachment. Witness statements and the inspection notebook filled in the rest of the timeline. CCTV footage and witness statements later indicated Liang reacted to the sound of snapping metal moments before impact. The steel bundle struck him directly in the chest with the full force of gravity, crushing him instantly against the concrete floor. The impact was devastating. Workers 20 feet away saw Liang's body crumple beneath the load, blood spreading rapidly across the concrete. Site medics reached him within minutes. Municipal responders followed shortly after, but Liang showed no vital signs. The medical examiner determined death was instantaneous from polytrauma caused by high-impact crushing injury. The construction site was immediately shut down by municipal authorities. Chen claimed equipment failure during questioning, but investigators recovered CCTV footage showing the timeline. Chen was later convicted of intentional homicide under Chinese criminal law and sentenced to life imprisonment, with the court citing retaliatory motive, safety violations, and deliberate scheduling of the lift as key factors. It was November 20th, 2015, and early winter cold gripped an aging office building on West Monroe Street in downtown Springfield, Illinois. The 4-story structure's rear emergency stairwell was rarely used, and an older space heater with disabled safety shutoffs had been placed at its base to keep pipes from freezing. 27-year-old Macy Twine worked as an overnight cleaning contractor, responsible for maintaining offices on the 2nd and 3rd floors. A conscientious worker with a strong sense of justice, Macy took pride in her thoroughness and reliability. Her quiet demeanor masked a determination to speak up when she witnessed wrongdoing, a trait that had recently put her in direct conflict with building management. Over the past several months, Macy had documented instances of workplace harassment by 49-year-old Darla Hume, the building's human resources administrator. Darla's behavior toward younger female employees had escalated from inappropriate comments to deliberate interference with their work schedules and pay. When other victims were too intimidated to come forward, Macy filed formal complaints with the building's ownership company, providing detailed accounts and supporting evidence. The complaints triggered an investigation that threatened Darla's position and reputation. Email records recovered later showed Darla's growing obsession with silencing Macy, whom she viewed as the primary threat to her career. Darla had researched Macy's work schedule and discovered that she often used the rear stairwell to access different floors during cleaning rounds. On the night in question, Macy began her usual cleaning routine on the upper floors. The building was nearly empty except for a few late-working tenants. Darla had arrived earlier that evening, ostensibly to catch up on paperwork, but security footage showed her carrying a bag containing industrial adhesive and wooden shims toward the rear stairwell. Working methodically in the dimly lit stairway, Darla looped a heavy chain through the ground floor fire door's crash bar and secured it with a padlock. She then jammed wooden shims into the door jamb, preventing the door from opening from inside. The space heater, positioned at the base of the rear stairwell, continued running unattended as Darla completed her sabotage. Approximately 2 hours later, Macy finished cleaning the 3rd floor and headed toward the rear stairwell. The space heater had been running continuously, and cleaning chemicals, paper supplies, and trash bags stored beside it began to smolder as the unit overheated, producing thick, toxic smoke. As Macy entered the stairwell, the accumulated heat ignited the combustible materials. Though the concrete construction slowed the spread of open flames, thick smoke rapidly filled the enclosed vertical shaft. Heat rising through the enclosed stairwell created a chimney effect, pulling thick smoke rapidly upward, and reducing visibility to near zero within minutes. Macy attempted to exit through the ground floor door, but found it completely blocked by the chained fire door and wooden shims. Trapped in the smoke-filled stairwell with no means of escape, Macy succumbed to smoke inhalation before emergency responders could reach her. The fire department arrived within 12 minutes, but the chained fire door delayed access long enough for smoke concentrations to become lethal. By the time firefighters breached the barrier, smoke concentration had reached lethal levels. Investigators found metallic shavings from the padlock's shackle and fragments of chain near the fire door that matched tools recovered from Darla's office. The wooden shims bore tool marks consistent with implements found in her desk. Email records confirmed her motive for revenge against Macy's whistleblowing activities. Darla Hume was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 35 years in Illinois State Prison, formally closing the case. It was October 14, 2015, and the autumn evening cast long shadows across a private marina in Seattle, where local business owners and investors gathered for their monthly networking event. The docks buzzed with clinking glasses and quiet conversations as guests celebrated another successful quarter. Trevor Blackwood adjusted his designer suit as he mingled among the crowd on his 60-foot yacht, his confident smile masking months of building anxiety. At 42, the successful software entrepreneur had built his reputation on innovation and trustworthiness, but behind the facade lay financial crimes that threatened to destroy everything. His software company had become one of Seattle's most promising startups, but Trevor had been secretly siphoning funds into offshore accounts for over 2 years. Trevor's former business partner and childhood friend, Daniel Rodriguez, had discovered the embezzlement 6 months earlier when inconsistencies led to a devastating audit. The betrayal had cost Daniel his life savings, home, marriage, and custody of his 2 young children. Daniel had trusted Trevor completely, even signing over temporary power of attorney while hospitalized for surgery, a decision Trevor quietly used to access company accounts. The discovery had sent Daniel into a downward spiral of depression and rage. Forced to move into his car after losing his house, he worked menial jobs while his former partner continued living in luxury. For 8 months, Daniel had been planning his revenge, studying Trevor's routines and learning he hosted yacht club gatherings on the second Tuesday of every month. Daniel had secured a position with the catering company servicing the events, working legitimate jobs for months to establish cover, while fantasizing about confronting the man who destroyed his life. That evening, Daniel arrived wearing the catering uniform, his face hidden beneath a baseball cap as he carried trays through the crowd. He watched Trevor for over an hour, waiting for the perfect moment when his former partner would be alone. The opportunity came when Trevor stepped onto the yacht's upper deck for a private phone call. According to Daniel's later confession to investigators, he followed up the narrow stairs, heart pounding as he prepared for the confrontation he had rehearsed countless times. When Trevor ended his call and turned around, the shock of recognition was immediate. Daniel revealed bank statements and transfer records proving the extent of Trevor's financial crimes. Trevor's surprise quickly turned to arrogance as he dismissed Daniel's accusations and threatened to have him arrested for trespassing. The callous response triggered something primal in Daniel, who lunged at his former friend with years of pent-up rage. The 2 men struggled violently near the yacht's railing, their fight hidden from party guests below. During the struggle, Trevor lost his footing and fell backward over the railing, plunging 15 feet into the dark waters of Puget Sound. Daniel watched in stunned silence as Trevor thrashed in the cold water, calling for help that Daniel chose not to provide. Within minutes, Trevor had disappeared beneath the surface. Daniel calmly returned to his catering duties. The splash had gone unheard amid the music and chatter from nearby boats, and by the time anyone realized Trevor was missing, nearly an hour had passed. Security cameras captured Daniel leaving at shift's end, but the death was initially ruled accidental drowning. The guilt consumed Daniel over following weeks, driving him to send anonymous tips that directed investigators back to Trevor's financial crimes. When police traced the emails to Daniel's work computer, he confessed, saying Trevor's death brought him no satisfaction. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison. It was October 22, 2014, in Lyon, France. The evening air was cool and crisp, with the streets quiet as autumn shadows lengthened. In a well-appointed apartment in the Croix-Rousse district, A convivial dinner was underway, but behind the polished silverware and carefully arranged candles, something was about to transform hospitality into tragedy. Isabelle Chevalier, 52, owned a small but respected bistro in central Lyon, known for her curated wine selection and seasonal menus. She had spent decades cultivating her reputation as both chef and sommelier, often attending regional tastings and representing local producers at culinary events. She prided herself on her knowledge of French gastronomy and hosting elegant dinners that doubled as networking opportunities for restaurateurs and wine merchants. Isabelle's professional experience extended to handling ingredients safely, understanding toxicological risks, and overseeing kitchen operations with precision. While confident in her culinary skills, Isabelle could not anticipate malicious intent from a guest who had a prior unresolved dispute with her over a wine shipment contract. That night, Isabelle prepared a shared dessert for the guests, unaware that one attendee had secretly introduced ouabain, a potent cardiotoxic glycoside, into the dish. The gathering included acquaintances from the culinary community, each engaged in light conversation, sampling wine, and enjoying the meticulously prepared meal. Isabelle consumed the dessert with enthusiasm, commenting on the texture and balance, a routine she'd performed countless times during tasting. Small signs, the slight bitterness at the edges of the dessert, went unremarked, masked by the dark chocolate ganache. The dessert had been carefully portioned to ensure only Isabelle ingested a lethal dose. Within 45 minutes, Isabelle started having severe stomach cramps, dizziness, blurry vision, and her heart rate slowed dangerously. Guests immediately noticed her pallor and unsteady movements, attempting to guide her to a chair. Despite first aid efforts, her condition deteriorated rapidly. Calls were made to emergency services and paramedics arrived within 10 minutes, finding her semi-conscious and in extreme distress. Heart rate was erratic, blood pressure collapsed, and neurological function impaired, consistent with potent cardiotoxic exposure. ECG monitoring showed severe arrhythmia, and paramedics initiated advanced life support measures, including oxygen, IV access, and cardiac monitoring. Guests attempted assisted respiration and monitored vitals as emergency responders transported her to the hospital. During the drive, Isabelle's condition worsened. She lost consciousness en route, and resuscitation attempts at the hospital failed. Witnesses reported her skin turning pale and cyanotic, pupils dilated, and absence of coordinated breathing. Footage from private security cameras confirmed she had ingested the dessert in its entirety, with no other obvious contributing factors present in the apartment. Medical staff confirmed that the ouabain fatally disrupted cardiac rhythm and neurological function. Post-mortem examination determined acute ouabain poisoning, a highly cardiotoxic glycoside, caused systemic cardiovascular failure, with toxicology measuring lethal levels in blood, stomach contents, and liver tissue. The manner of death was ruled a homicide. Police collected remaining food samples and interviewed attendees, resulting in a confession from the responsible individual. Within a week, French authorities arrested Julien Marchand, the guest responsible, and he was charged with premeditated murder. He was convicted and sentenced to 25 years imprisonment, with additional fines and a prohibition from working in food service. An accomplice who aided in concealing the poison received a shorter sentence of 10 years. It was February 14th, 2017 in Plano, Texas. The evening was warm for winter, and the neighborhood was quiet as Marcus Thompson pulled into his driveway after work. Marcus, 38, was a successful real estate agent whose personal life had begun to unravel months earlier. Financial records later confirmed an ongoing affair with his secretary, hotel stays, gifts, and unexplained charges. 3 weeks before Valentine's Day, his wife Diana, 36, uncovered the evidence while preparing tax paperwork. Phone records and receipts confirmed what she suspected. She did not confront him, and to friends, nothing appeared outwardly different. Phone data later recovered by investigators showed that shortly after discovering the affair, Diana searched repeatedly for residential water heaters, scalding temperatures, and how quickly hot water could cause incapacitating burns. No service calls or repair requests were ever made, despite her later statements that she had been inspecting the heater. On the afternoon of Valentine's Day, while Marcus was at work, Diana accessed the gas water heater in the utility closet. Inspectors later confirmed the thermostat had been manually adjusted far beyond recommended safety limits, high enough to cause severe burns within seconds of contact. There was no mechanical malfunction and no evidence of accidental adjustment. That evening, Marcus returned home, ate dinner, and mentioned showering before bed. Sometime after 10 p.m., he entered the upstairs bathroom and turned on the water. The temperature surged almost immediately. Medical experts later testified that exposure at that level would have caused instant pain and rapid skin damage, triggering a reflexive withdrawal that likely caused him to lose footing on the wet tub surface. Evidence showed Marcus attempted to step back, but slipped inside the tub as the water continued running. Neighbors later reported hearing a single heavy thud through the shared wall, followed by the sound of water that did not shut off. There was no further noise. Call logs showed that more than 20 minutes passed before emergency services were contacted. First responders found Marcus collapsed in the tub, with extensive scald injuries across his torso, arms, and upper legs. He was alive but in critical condition, showing signs of shock and severe thermal trauma. He was transported to a regional burn center, where he died early the next morning from complications related to the burns and resulting organ failure. The death was initially considered a household accident. That changed when investigators examined the water heater. The temperature setting exceeded manufacturer limits and local safety codes, and could only have been changed manually. Diana's statements about when she last accessed the heater shifted over time. Phone data recovered during the investigation showed repeated searches related to scalding injuries and survivability in the weeks leading up to Marcus's death. Prosecutors argued the act was deliberate, revenge carried out by altering a lethal domestic system and allowing the consequences to unfold. The defense claimed recklessness. The jury ultimately convicted Diana of manslaughter, citing conscious disregard of a known deadly hazard. Marcus's death was ruled preventable. Investigators concluded it was not mechanical failure, but an intentional setup that turned an ordinary routine into a fatal act of revenge. It was February 18, 2017, in Riverside, California, on a Saturday evening at a neighborhood recreation center. The gym was crowded for a weekly pickup basketball league. Shoes squeaked across the court. The scoreboard buzzed between possessions and phones were propped against bleachers to record highlights. From the outside, it was just another competitive game. Marcus Lee was 27 years old and worked as a delivery supervisor for a regional logistics company. He played basketball 3 nights a week and treated pickup games like organized competition. Teammates described him as aggressive on defense and physical under the rim. He used his body often, boxing out hard, setting moving screens and throwing elbows when fighting for position. Complaints had been made before, but games usually continued. Jason Morales, 26, worked as a junior electrician and had played against Marcus for over a year. They knew each other by name. Their matchups were tense. During several games, Marcus had bumped Jason mid-air or driven his shoulder into him while cutting to the basket. 2 weeks earlier, during a rebound scramble, Marcus's elbow caught Jason above the eye. Gym CCTV recorded Jason leaving the court bleeding from a cut eyebrow that later required stitches. Witnesses said Marcus waved it off as accidental. On the night of the incident, both men were on opposing teams. The game was fast and close. Jason guarded Marcus tightly, avoiding contact early. Marcus continued playing physically, backing into defenders and using his arms to create space. At one point, Jason complained to teammates that Marcus was continuing the same physical behavior from previous games. No official referees were present, only a scorekeeper. Midway through the second half, CCTV above the backboard shows Marcus driving on a fast break. Jason trails him closely. As Marcus jumps for a dunk, Jason closes in and forcefully extends both hands into Marcus's lower back while he's airborne. The push shifts Marcus forward mid-jump. He misses the rim, and his head snaps back, striking an unpadded metal support arm behind the backboard. part of an older hoop assembly. The impact is loud and sharp. Marcus drops straight down onto the court. A phone video from the bleachers captures players stopping and shouting as blood begins pooling near his head. Jason steps back toward the baseline as others wave for help. The gym calls 911 at 8:42 p.m. Paramedics arrive within minutes and attempt stabilization on the court. Marcus shows no meaningful response and is transported to a nearby hospital, where he is pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The medical examiner later ruled the cause of death as traumatic brain injury caused by a high-force impact with a fixed metal structure. Police reviewed gym CCTV and phone videos, confirming Jason's hands extended into Marcus while he was airborne. Witnesses described ongoing tension between the two men, including a prior elbow injury captured on earlier footage. Messages recovered from Jason's phone referenced resentment over Marcus's physical style of play. Jason Morales was arrested and charged with voluntary manslaughter. He was later convicted and sentenced to 11 years in California State Prison, with the court citing the retaliatory nature of the shove and the extreme risk created by pushing an airborne player toward a fixed metal structure. The Recreation Center suspended pickup basketball leagues, upgraded hoop padding to cover exposed support arms, and revised safety policies to limit physical contact during unsupervised games. It was July 4, 2016, at a lakeside campground in Michigan. The evening was warm and still, campfires lining the shoreline as quiet settled over the beach and scattered tents near the water. Natalie Pierce, a 22-year-old retail worker, had been camping at the lakeside site for the holiday weekend. Known for her impulsive nature and quick temper, Natalie had engaged in a heated argument earlier that evening with Felix Smith over his loud music that continued well past quiet hours. The dispute had ended without resolution, leaving both campers frustrated and angry. Natalie decided to retaliate by setting off fireworks near Felix's tent, hoping to disturb his sleep. She had purchased consumer-grade fireworks from a roadside stand, but had improperly modified them by shortening the fuse and damaging the casing, compromising the device's designed delay and stability. A smartphone had been left recording at her campsite to capture lake footage for social media. The campground remained relatively quiet as other campers settled in for the night. Natalie retrieved one of the modified fireworks from her supplies, a cylindrical device approximately 6 inches long that had been designed for safe aerial display. Her alterations compromised the fuse timing and structural integrity, making the device unpredictable and prone to premature detonation. She positioned herself near the water's edge, approximately 30 feet from Felix's tent, planning to light the firework and throw it toward the shoreline to create maximum noise and disruption. Natalie ignited the fuse with a lighter, expecting the standard 3-second delay before detonation. However, the modified firework malfunctioned immediately due to the removed safety wrapping. Instead of the planned delay, the device detonated almost immediately after ignition, exploding while still in her hand. The explosion created a bright flash visible across the campground, followed by a sharp crack that echoed off the water. Fragments from the fireworks struck Natalie's neck and upper chest, causing catastrophic soft tissue damage and rapid external bleeding. She collapsed onto the sandy beach and rapidly lost consciousness as blood loss progressed. The smartphone continued recording from its fixed position, capturing the flash of the explosion, the sound, and Natalie's collapse. Other campers rushed to the scene within minutes, but Natalie had already lost consciousness from massive blood loss. Emergency services were called immediately, but the remote campground location meant a 25-minute response time for paramedics. Natalie was pronounced dead at the scene before medical help could arrive. The medical examiner determined the cause of death as exsanguination from multiple penetrating wounds. The smartphone recording provided investigators with clear evidence of the firework ignition and subsequent explosion. Police determined that Natalie had improperly modified the consumer fireworks, removing safety features that led to the premature detonation. The investigation determined the incident stemmed from retaliation against Felix Smith, who was questioned but not charged. The medical examiner ruled the manner of death accidental, citing improper handling and modification of consumer fireworks. Natalie's death became a cautionary example of how amateur pyrotechnic alterations can turn celebratory devices into deadly weapons. It was December 9, 2015, at a middle school in Carmel, Indiana. After 4:30 p.m., the building had mostly emptied, leaving only a few staff members finishing end-of-semester tasks, while hallway cameras continued recording every entry and exit for later review. Among the remaining teachers was Harold Harlan, 44, who had spent 14 years teaching 7th grade American history. His classroom was known for rigid discipline and public shaming. He routinely read failing grades aloud, assigned detention for minor behavior, and kept detailed records that parents later described as humiliating. Multiple complaints were filed, but internal reviews found no policy violations, as district anti-bullying rules applied only to students, not teachers. Detention took place in room 127, a former storage room off the main hallway. The space had no windows, a single inward opening door, and relied entirely on the building's central ventilation. It held a few desks, a teacher's table, and metal cabinets occasionally used to store custodial supplies. Policy required the supervising teacher to stay inside with the student, leaving both alone in an enclosed room with little oversight. That afternoon, Harlan assigned detention to Zayden Webb, a 13-year-old student who had received repeated detention since the start of the school year. Webb had been singled out frequently in class, mocked for poor scores, and once kept after school for nearly an hour longer than required, according to later statements from classmates. Security footage showed Webb entering room 127 at 3:45 p.m. and leaving at 4:15 p.m. after signing out. Later footage showed Harlan entering the room at 4:18 p.m. and never exiting. What investigators later uncovered filled in what the cameras could not. Earlier that week, Webb had accessed a custodial supply area and removed a bottle of muriatic acid used for restroom cleaning. During detention, he poured the chemical into an open container inside room 127 and damaged the door handle mechanism using a small tool from his backpack. He then sealed the container inside a cabinet and left the room, knowing Harlan often stayed behind to work alone. At 4:18 p.m., Harlan re-entered the room with papers and a laptop. As the room sat closed, hydrochloric acid vapors slowly filled the space. With no windows and limited airflow, the fumes intensified. Harlan began coughing and experienced rapid throat and lung irritation. As he tried to escape, the damaged door hardware failed. Scratch marks later found on the door, and walls showed repeated attempts to force it open. The acid burned his face, neck, and hands as he struggled to breathe. He collapsed beside his desk as oxygen deprivation worsened. At 5:47 p.m., custodian James Torres noticed a sharp chemical odor in the hallway and traced it to room 127. Inside, he found Harlan unresponsive and immediately called emergency services as hallway cameras continued recording the first responders entering the room. Responders arrived minutes later but were unable to revive him. The medical examiner ruled the death an acute respiratory failure caused by prolonged exposure to hydrochloric acid vapors with severe internal and external chemical burns. Investigators later determined the act was deliberate. Webb admitted he wanted Harlan to feel trapped, citing months of public humiliation and fear. He was adjudicated delinquent for an act equivalent to murder and sentenced to confinement in a state juvenile facility until age 21. The school permanently closed room 127, revised detention policies to require multiple staff, and removed chemical storage from instructional areas. It was January 16, 2014. The morning air in Patna, India, was thick. Breakfast preparation was underway in the kitchen of a small private boarding school, steam rising from aluminum pots as rice and lentils cooked for fewer than 60 resident students. Ramesh Singh, a 45-year-old cook who had worked in the school's kitchen for 8 years, wasn't supposed to be there that morning. He'd been terminated 3 weeks earlier after repeated complaints about hygiene violations and showing up drunk during meal preparation. The district education officer had finally acted on the headmistress's formal complaint, ending Ramesh's employment without severance. Colleagues said that Ramesh blamed the headmistress entirely for his firing. They said that he'd told them he worked there longer than she had, and the dismissal meant losing his small income and facing shame in his neighborhood. For 3 weeks, he'd watched from across the street as the replacement cook arrived each morning. He knew the kitchen routine perfectly, the unlocked side entrance that had no guard during early morning hours, and the chaos of morning preparation when nobody paid attention to who came and went. That morning, a student noticed Ramesh slipped into the kitchen at approximately 10:45 in the morning, carrying a small bottle containing approximately 30 milliliters of concentrated organophosphate pesticide, telling the clerk he needed it for crop treatment. The current cook had stepped outside to receive the vegetable delivery. Ramesh moved quickly to the nearly finished dal pot, pouring the entire bottle into the simmering lentils, stirring thoroughly so it dissolved completely and left no visible trace. He was gone within 90 seconds. By late morning, the dining hall filled with younger boarding students who ate their meals together under staff supervision. Teachers distributed steel plates as the dal was ladled over rice. The children, most from families surviving on less than 100 rupees daily, ate eagerly. Within 8 minutes, a 7-year-old girl began vomiting violently, then another child, then 5 more simultaneously. The cafeteria erupted into chaos. Children clutched their stomachs, sweating profusely despite the cool weather, their pupils constricted to pinpoints. Several collapsed face first into their plates. Teachers screamed for help, trying to carry convulsing students toward the gate. But 3 teachers also began showing symptoms after tasting the food during service. Parents waiting outside rushed in, finding children unconscious and struggling to breathe. A teacher managed to call emergency services at 12:14 in the afternoon. The nearest hospital was approximately 7 miles away. Private vehicles began evacuating children immediately, but traffic and deteriorating conditions made transport agonizing. 21 students and 3 staff members were transported to nearby hospitals, overwhelming emergency departments unprepared for mass casualty poisoning. 4 children, aged 6 to 9, died within hours from acute respiratory failure, complicated by secondary hypoxic organ injury. The post-mortem examinations revealed severe neurotoxicity, pulmonary edema, and secondary hypoxic damage to multiple organs, consistent with acute organophosphate poisoning. Their small bodies had absorbed lethal concentrations of the pesticide through ingestion, causing their nervous systems to fail, while breathing became impossible. The school's CCTV footage showed Ramesh entering the side entrance with time-stamped grainy images that captured his movement, but not the exact stirring of the dal pot. So investigators still relied on the discarded bottle and vendor receipt to confirm the act. Investigators found the plastic pesticide bottle with a partially legible label, discarded 2 blocks away with his fingerprints partially intact. Ramesh was arrested later that evening. He was later convicted on multiple counts of murder and attempted murder and sentenced to life imprisonment, with the court citing deliberate retaliation and the vulnerability of the victims as aggravating factors. It was August 16, 2017, and the late summer heat had settled over Missouri's rural highways. The 2-lane state road stretched through rolling farmland, with visibility reduced by evening haze and the approaching dusk. Traffic moved steadily at posted speeds, with commuters heading home from work in nearby towns. 36-year-old Veena Crum was driving home from her job at a local automotive dealership, where she worked as a clerk, handling paperwork and vehicle inspections. Known for her attention to detail and strict adherence to regulations, Veena had built a reputation for thoroughness that sometimes created friction with co-workers. Several weeks earlier, Veena had discovered that Earl Timmons, a 44-year-old former colleague in the service department, had been approving safety inspections on vehicles that hadn't undergone proper testing. The fraudulent paperwork posed serious liability risks for the dealership and potentially dangerous situations for customers. Veena reported the violations to management, providing detailed documentation. The investigation resulted in Earl's immediate suspension and eventual termination. He lost not only his income but also his reputation in the tight-knit automotive community. Text messages recovered later showed Earl's escalating anger toward Veena, whom he blamed entirely for his downfall. He had accessed her vehicle while she worked, deliberately interfering with multiple rear safety systems, while convincing himself it would only frighten her. As evening approached, Veena merged onto the state highway for her usual commute home. Traffic moved at approximately 55 miles per hour, with drivers relying on headlights and taillights in the challenging visibility conditions. A pickup truck following roughly 70 feet behind Veena's sedan maintained the gap as traffic continued steadily. The driver had been glancing periodically at his phone during what seemed like routine highway driving. Ahead, a marked construction zone had reduced traffic to a slow crawl, with vehicles braking in staggered waves as lanes narrowed. The pickup driver looked up from his phone just as Veena's sedan began decelerating rapidly. He expected to see braking indicators or hazard signals illuminate, providing the critical warning cue drivers rely on in congested traffic. However, investigators later determined that both the brake light circuit and rear hazard wiring had been deliberately severed, eliminating multiple visual warning systems. Without the safety signal and with his attention momentarily diverted, the pickup driver recognized the danger only when he noticed the rapidly decreasing gap. He slammed his brakes, but the 70-foot following distance and split-second delay proved insufficient. The impact occurred with the truck still traveling approximately 55 miles per hour, while Veena's sedan had slowed to nearly zero. The force of the collision compressed the sedan's rear section catastrophically, pushing the trunk space forward into the passenger compartment. The structural damage was devastating, with metal components penetrating the rear seat area. Emergency responders arrived within 15 minutes. Paramedics found Veena trapped in the driver's seat, having sustained massive blunt force trauma. Despite immediate medical attention, she was pronounced dead at the scene. Accident investigators documented clean cuts in the brake light wiring harness, indicating deliberate sabotage. Forensic analysis revealed Earl's fingerprints inside the trunk area. Phone records and text messages confirmed his motive for revenge. Earl Timmons was arrested, convicted on homicide-related charges, and sentenced to a lengthy term in state prison, with prosecutors citing deliberate vehicle sabotage as the direct cause of death. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.